All right, guys, we're starting a new book. Oscar Wilde, the author of The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is it's a longer novel. This is actually a play called The Importance of Being Earnest. It's only 3 acts. It's very short. This guy's pretty prominent for not really writing so much. Um, yeah, that's his name. The Importance of Being Earnest. This is act number 1. It might be a character log. The character is John Worthing, JP named Jack, Mr. George Alexander, Algernon Moncrief, Mr. Allen Ainsworth, Reverend Canon Chasuble, DD, Mr. H. Vincent, Merriman Butler, Mr. Frank Delall, Lane Manservant, Mr. F. Kinsley Peel, Lady Bracknell, Miss Rose Leclerc, Han Gwendolyn Fairfax, Miss Irene Vanbrugh, Cicely Cardew, Miss Evelyn Millard, Miss Prism, who's the governess, Mrs. George Kinidge. The scenes of the play: Act 1, Algernon Moncrief's flat in Half Moon Street, W. Act 2, the garden at the Manor House, Woolton. Act 3, drawing room of the Manor House, Woolton. Time, the present. Place, London. So, yeah, The Importance of Being Earnest, Act 1. So we'll let the play reveal who are the main characters, okay? So the scene: morning room in Algernon's flat in Half Moon Street. The room is luxuriously and artistically furnished. The sound of a piano is heard in the adjoining room. Somebody named Lane is arranging afternoon tea on the table, and after the music has ceased, Algernon enters. So Lane is arranging the room, and Algernon enters. So Algernon: did you hear what I was playing, Lane? Lane: I didn't think it polite to listen, sir. Algernon: I'm sorry for that, for your sake. I don't play accurately. Anyone can play accurately, but I play with wonderful expression. As far as the piano is concerned, sentiment is my forte. I keep science for life. Lane: yes, sir. Algernon: and speaking of the science of life, have you got the cucumber sandwiches cut for Lady Bracknell? Lane: yes, sir. Hands them on a salver. So Algernon inspects them, takes 2, and sits down on the sofa. Oh, by the way, Lane, I see from your book that on Thursday night, when Lord Shoreman and Mr. Worthing were dining with me, 8 bottles of champagne are entered as having been consumed. Lane: yes, sir, 8 bottles and a pint. Algernon: why is it that at a bachelor's establishment the servants invariably drink the champagne? I ask merely for information. Lane: I attribute it to the superior quality of the wine, sir. I have often observed that in married households the champagne is rarely of a first-rate brand. Algernon: good heavens, is marriage so demoralizing as that? So, because he's a bachelor, or he's bachelor, so he said married people don't drink as good as wine as bachelors. So Lane responds: I believe it is a very pleasant state, sir. I have had very little experience of it myself up to the present. I have only been married once. That was in consequence of a misunderstanding between myself and a young person. Algernon, languidly. That's it. This is his attitude. I don't know that I am much interested in your family life, Lane. Lane: no, sir. It is not a very interesting subject. I never think of it myself. Algernon: very natural, I am sure. That will do, Lane. Thank you. Lane: thank you, sir. Lane goes out. Algernon: Lane's views on marriage seem somewhat lax. Really, if the lower orders don't set us a good example, what on earth is the use of them? They seem as a class to have absolutely no sense of moral responsibility. Now re-enters Lane. Lane: Mr. Ernest Worthing. Enter Jack. Lane goes out, so Lane came back in to introduce Mr. Ernest Worthing, who's also known as Jack. So Algernon: how are you, my dearest Ernest? What brings you up to town? Jack: oh, pleasure, pleasure. What else should bring one anywhere? Eating as usual. I see, Algy. So I guess that's short for Algernon. So Algernon stiffly: I believe it is customary in good society to take some slight refreshment at 5 o'clock. Where have you been since last Thursday? Jack, sitting down on the sofa. In the country. Algernon: what on earth do you do there? Jack, pulling off his gloves. When one is in town, one amuses oneself. When one is in the country, one amuses other people. It is excessively boring. So Algernon, and who are the people you amuse? Jack airily, oh, neighbors, neighbors. Algernon, got nice neighbors in your part of Shofsfire? He's asking. Jack, perfectly horrid, never speak to one of them. Algernon, how immensely you must amuse them. Goes over and takes sandwich. By the way, Shropshire is your country, is it not? Shropshire. That's a name. That's where Shropshire. So Jack, Shropshire? Yes, of course. Hello. Why all these cups? Why cucumber sandwiches? Why such reckless extravagance in one so young? Who is coming to tea? Algernon, oh, merely Aunt Augusta and Gwendolen. Algernon, yes, that is all very well. Oh, no, no. Jack responds to Algernon because he asked him who's coming over, and Algernon says, "Oh, merely Aunt Augusta and Gwendolen." Jack, how perfectly delightful. Algernon, yes, that is all very well, but I am afraid Aunt Augusta won't quite approve of your being here. Jack, may I ask why? Algernon, my dear fellow, the way you flirt with Gwendolen is perfectly disgraceful. It is almost as bad as the way Gwendolen flirts with you. Jack, I am in love with Gwendolen. I've come up to town expressly to propose to her. Algernon, I thought you had come up for pleasure. I call that business. Jack, how utterly unromantic you are. Algernon, I really don't see anything romantic in proposing. It is very romantic to be in love, but there was nothing romantic about a definite proposal. Why, one may be accepted. One usually is, I believe. Then the excitement is all over. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. If I ever get married, I'll certainly try to forget the fact. Jack, I have no doubt about that, dear Algie. The divorce court was specially invented for people whose memories are so curiously constituted. Algernon, oh, there was no use speculating on that subject. Divorces are made in heaven. Jack puts out his hand to take a sandwich. Algernon at once interferes. Please don't touch the cucumber sandwiches. They are ordered specially for Aunt Augustus or Aunt Augusta. Take one and eats it. So Jack, I guess, take one. Jack, well, you have been eating them all the time. Algernon, that is quite a different matter. She is my aunt. Takes plate from below. Have some bread and butter. The bread and butter is for Gwendolen. Gwendolen is devoted to bread and butter. So Jack responds, advancing to table and helping himself. And very good bread and butter it is, too. Algernon, well, my dear fellow, you need not eat as if you were going to eat at all. You behave as if you were married to her already. You are not married to her already, and I don't think you ever will be. Jack, why on earth do you say that? Algernon, well, in the first place, girls never marry the men they flirt with. Girls don't think it right. Jack, oh, that is nonsense. Algernon, it isn't. It is a great truth. It accounts for the extraordinary number of bachelors that one sees all over the place. In the second place, I don't give my consent. Jack, your consent? Algernon, my dear fellow, Gwendolen is my first cousin, and before I allow you to marry her, you have to clear up the whole question of Sicily. Rings bell. Jack, Sicily? What on earth do you mean? What do you mean, Algie, by Sicily? I don't know anyone of the name of Sicily. Enter Lane. Or the servant comes back in. Algernon, bring me that cigarette case Mr. Worthing left in the smoking room the last time he dined here. Lane, yes, sir. Lane goes out. Jack, do you mean to say you have had my cigarette case all this time? I wish to goodness you had let me know. I've been writing frantic letters to Scotland Yard about it. I was nearly offering a large reward. Algernon, well, I wish you would offer one. I happen to be more than usually hard up. Jack, there was no good offering a large reward now that the thing is found. Enter Lane with the cigarette case on a salver. Algernon takes it at once. Lane goes out. Algernon, I think that it is rather mean of you, Earnest, I must say. Opens case and examines it. However, it makes no matter, for now that I look at the inscription inside, I find that the thing isn't yours after all. Jack, of course it's mine. Moving to him. You have seen me with it 100 times, and you have no right whatsoever to read what is written inside. It is a very ungentlemanly thing to read a private cigarette case. Algernon, oh, it is absurd to have a hard and fast rule about what one should read and what one shouldn't. More than half of modern culture depends on what one shouldn't read. Jack, I'm quite aware of the fact, and I don't propose to discuss modern culture. It isn't the sort of thing one should talk of in private. I simply want my cigarette case back. Algernon, yes, but this isn't your cigarette case. This cigarette case is a present from someone of the name of Cicely, and you said you didn't know anyone of that name. Jack, well, if you want to know, Cicely happens to be my aunt. Algernon, your aunt? Jack, yes, charming old lady she is too. Lives at Tunbridge Wells. Just give it back to me, Algie. Algernon, retreating to back of sofa. But why does she call herself Little Cicely if she is your aunt and lives at Tunbridge Wells? Reading. From little Cicely with her fondest love. Jack, moving to sofa and kneeling upon it. My dear fellow, what on earth is there in that? Some aunts are tall, some aunts are not tall. That is a matter that surely an aunt may be allowed to decide for herself. You seem to think that every aunt should be exactly like your aunt. That is absurd. For heaven's sake, give me back my cigarette case. Follows Algernon around the room. Algernon, yes, but why does your aunt call you her uncle? From little Cicely with her fondest love to her dear Uncle Jack. There was no objection, I admit, to aunt being a small aunt, but why an aunt, no matter what her size may be, should call her own nephew her uncle, I can't quite make out. Besides, your name isn't Jack at all. It is Ernest. Jack. It is Ernest. It isn't Ernest, it's Jack. Algernon. You have always told me it was Ernest. I have introduced you to everyone as Ernest. You answer to you answer to the name of Ernest. You look as if your name was Ernest. You are the most earnest-looking person I ever saw in my life. It is perfectly absurd you're saying that your name isn't Ernest. It's on your cards. Here is one of them. Taking it from case. Mr. Ernest Worthing, B4 the Albany. I'll keep this as a proof of your name is Ernest if you ever attempt to deny it to me, or to Gwendolyn, or to anyone else. Puts the card in his pocket. Jack. Well, my name is Ernest in town and Jack in the country, and the cigarette case was given to me in the country. Algernon. Yes, but that does not account for the fact that your small aunt Cicely, who lives at Tunbridge Wells, calls you her dear uncle. Come, old boy, you had much better have the thing out at once. Jack. My dear Algy, you talk exactly as if you were a dentist. It is very vulgar to talk like a dentist when one isn't a dentist. It produces a false impression. Algernon. Well, that is exactly what dentists always do. Now go on. Tell me the whole thing. I may mention that I have always suspected you of being a confirmed and secret Bunburyist, and I am quite sure of it now. Bunburyist. Jack, Bunburyist? What on earth do you mean by a Bunburyist? Algernon. I'll reveal to you the meaning of that incomparable expression as soon as you are kind enough to inform me why you are Ernest in town and Jack in the country. Jack. Well, produce my cigarette case first. Algernon. Here it is. Hand cigarette case. Now produce your explanation and pray make it improbable. Sits on sofa. Jack. My dear fellow, there was nothing improbable about my explanation at all. In fact, it's perfectly ordinary. Old Mr. Thomas Cardew, who adopted me when I was a little boy, made me in his will guardian to his granddaughter, Miss Cicely Cardew, Cicely, who addresses me as her uncle, from motives of respect that you could not possibly appreciate, lives at my place in the country under the charge of her admirable governess, Miss Prism. Her admirable governess, Miss Prism. So Algernon. Where was that place in the country, by the way? Jack. That is nothing to you, dear boy. You are not going to be invited. I may tell you candidly that the place is not in Shropshire. Algernon. I suspected that, my dear fellow. I have Bunburied all over Shropshire on 2 separate occasions. Now go on. Why are you Ernest in town and Jack in the country? My dear Algy, I don't know whether you will be able to understand my real motives. You are hardly serious enough when one is placed in the position of guardian. One has to adopt a very high moral tone on all subjects. It's one's duty to do so. And as a high moral tone can hardly be said to conduce very much to either one's health or one's happiness. In order to get up to town, I have always pretended to have a younger brother of the name of Ernest, who lives in the Albany and gets into the most dreadful scrapes. That, my dear Algy, is the whole truth, pure and simple. Algernon. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. Modern life would be very tedious if it were either, and modern literature a complete impossibility. Jack. That wouldn't be at all a bad thing. Algernon. Literary criticism is not your forte, my dear fellow. Don't try it. You should leave that to people who haven't been at a university. They do it so well in the daily papers. What you really are is a Bunburyist. I was quite right in saying that you were a Bunburyist. You are one of the most advanced Bunburyists I know. I'm curious what that is. Jack, what on earth do you mean? Algernon. You have invented a very useful younger brother called Ernest in order that you may be able to come up to town as often as you like. I've invented an invaluable permanent invalid called Bunbury, in order that I may be able to go down into the country whenever I choose. Bunbury is perfectly invaluable. If it wasn't for Bunbury's extraordinary bad health, for instance, I wouldn't be able to dine with you at Willis's tonight, for I've been really engaged to Aunt Augusta for more than a week. Jack. I haven't asked you to dine with me anywhere tonight. Algernon. I know, you are absurdly careless about sending out invitations. It is very foolish of you. Nothing annoys people so much as not receiving invitations. Jack. You had much better dine with your young Aunt Augusta. Algernon. I haven't the smallest intention of doing anything of the kind. To begin with, I dined there on Monday, and once a week is quite enough to dine with one's own relations. In the second place, whenever I do dine there, I am always treated as a member of the family and sent down with either no woman at all or 2. In the third place, I know perfectly well whom she will place me next to tonight. She'll place me next to Mary Farquhar, who always flirts with her own husband across the dinner table. That is not very pleasant. Indeed, it is not even decent, and that sort of thing is enormously on the increase. The amount of women in London who flirt with their own husbands is perfectly scandalous. It looks so bad. It is simply washing one's clean linen in public. Besides, now that I know you to be a confirmed Bunburyist, I naturally want to talk to you about Bunburying. I want to tell you the rules. Jack, I'm not a Bunbury at all, or Bunburyist at all. If Gwendolen accepts me, I'm going to kill my brother. Indeed, I think I'll kill him in any case. Cicely is a little too much interested in him, and is a rather a bore, so I'm going to get rid of Ernest, and I strongly advise you to do the same with your invalid friend who has the absurd name. Algernon, nothing will induce me to part with Bunbury, and if you ever get married, which seems to me extremely problematic, you will be very glad to know Bunbury. A man who marries without knowing Bunbury has a very tedious time of it. Jack, that is nonsense. If I marry a charming girl like Gwendolen, and she is the only girl I ever saw in my life that I would marry, I certainly won't want to know Bunbury. Algernon, then your wife will. You don't seem to realize that in married life, 3 is company and 2 is none. Jack, sententiously, that, my dear young friend, is the theory that the corrupt French drama has been propounding for the last 50 years. Algernon, yes, and that the happy English home has proved in half the time. Jack, for heaven's sake, don't try to be cynical. It's perfectly easy to be cynical. Algernon, my dear fellow, it isn't easy to be anything nowadays. There's such a lot of beastly competition about. The sound of an electric bell is heard. Ah, that must be Aunt Augusta. Only relatives or creditors ever ring in that Wagnerian manner. Now, if I get her out of the way for 10 minutes so that you can have an opportunity for proposing to Gwendolen, may I dine with you two tonight at Willis's? May I dine with you two? No, may I dine with you tonight at Willis's? So the sound of an electric bell. So Aunt Augusta's there. So Jack, I suppose so if you want to. So Algernon, yes, but you must be serious about it. I hate people who are not serious about meals, and it's so shallow of them. Enter Lane. Lane, Lady Bracknell and Miss Fairfax. Algernon goes forward to meet them. Enter Lady Bracknell and Gwendolen. So Lady Bracknell, good afternoon, dear Algernon. Hope you are behaving very well. Algernon, I'm feeling very well, Aunt Augusta. Lady Bracknell, that's not quite the same thing. In fact, the two things rarely go together. Sees Jack and bows to him with icy coldness. Algernon to Gwendolen, dear me, you are smart. Gwendolen, I am always smart, aren't I, Mr. Worthing? Jack, you're quite perfect, Miss Fairfax. Gwendolen, oh, I hope I am not that. It will leave no room for developments, and I tend to develop in many directions. Gwendolen and Jack sit down together in the corner. Lady Bracknell, I'm sorry if we are a little late, Algernon, but I was obliged to call on dear Lady Harbury. I hadn't been there since her poor husband's death. I never saw a woman so altered. She looks quite 20 years younger, and now I'll have a cup of tea and one of those nice cucumber sandwiches you promised me. Algernon, certainly, Aunt Augusta, goes over to the tea table. Lady Bracknell, won't you come and sit here, Gwendolen? Gwendolen, thanks, Mamma. I'm quite comfortable where I am. Algernon, picking up empty plate in horror. Good heavens, Lane. Why are there no cucumber sandwiches? I ordered them specially. Lane, gravely. There were no cucumbers in the market this morning, sir. I went down twice. Algernon, no cucumbers. Lane, no, sir, not even for ready money. Algernon, that will do, Lane. Thank you. Lane, thank you, sir. Goes out. Algernon, I'm greatly distressed, Aunt Augusta, about there being no cucumbers, not even for ready money. Lady Bracknell, it really makes no matter, Algernon. I had some crumpets with Lady Harbury, who seems to me to be living entirely for pleasure now. Algernon, I hear her hair has turned quite gold from grief. Lady Bracknell, it certainly has changed its color, from what cause I, of course, cannot say. Algernon crosses and hands tea. Thank you, I've quite a treat for you tonight, Algernon. I'm going to send you down with Mary Farquhar. She is such a nice woman and so attentive to her husband. It's delightful to watch them. Algernon, I'm afraid, Aunt Augusta, I shall have to give up the pleasure of dining with you tonight after all. Lady Bracknell, frowning. I hope not, Algernon. It would put my table completely out. Your uncle would have to dine upstairs. Fortunately, he is accustomed to that. Algernon, it is a great bore, and I need hardly say a terrible disappointment to me, but the fact is I have just had a telegram to say that my poor friend Bunbury is very ill again. Exchanges glances with Jack. They seem to think I should be with them. Lady Bracknell. It is very strange. This Mr. Bunbury seems to suffer from curiously bad health. Algernon. Yes, poor Bunbury is a dreadful invalid. Lady Bracknell. Well, I must say, Algernon, that I think it is a high time that Mr. Bunbury made up his mind whether he was going to live or die. This shilly-shallying with the question is absurd, nor do I in any way approve of the modern sympathy with invalids. I consider it morbid. Illness of any kind is hardly a thing to be encouraged in others. Health is a primary duty of life. I'm always telling that to your poor uncle, but he never seems to take much notice. As far as any improvement in his ailment goes, I should be much obliged if you would ask Mr. Bunbury from me to be kind enough not to have a relapse on Saturday, for I rely on you to arrange my music for me. It is my last reception, and one wants something that will encourage conversation, particularly at the end of the season when everyone has practically said whatever they had to say, which in most cases was probably not much. Algernon. I'll speak to Bunbury, Aunt Augusta. If he is still conscious, and I think I can promise you he'll be all right by Saturday. Of course, the music is a great difficulty. You see, if one plays good music, people don't listen, and if one plays bad music, people don't talk. But I'll run over the program I've drawn out, if you will kindly come into the next room for a moment. Lady Bracknell. Thank you, Algernon. It is very thoughtful of you. Rising and following Algernon. I'm sure the program will be delightful after a few expurgations. French songs I cannot possibly allow. People always seem to think that they are improper, and either look shocked, which is vulgar, or laugh, which is worse. But German sounds a thoroughly respectable language, and indeed I believe is so. Gwendolen, you will accompany me. So Gwendolen, certainly, Mamma. Lady Bracknell and Algernon go into the music room. Gwendolen remains behind. So Jack, charming day it has been, Miss Fairfax. Gwendolen, pray don't talk to me about the weather, Mr. Worthing. Whenever people talk to me about the weather, I always feel quite certain that they mean something else, and that makes me so nervous. Jack, I do mean something else. Gwendolen, I thought so. In fact, I am never wrong. Jack, and I would like to be allowed to take advantage of Lady Bracknell's temporary absence. Gwendolen, I would certainly advise you to do so. Mama has a way of coming back suddenly into a room that I have often had to speak to her about. So Jack, nervously, Miss Fairfax, ever since I met you, I have admired you more than any girl I've ever met since I met you. So Jack, nervously, Miss Fairfax, ever since I met you, I have admired you more than any girl I've ever met since I met you. So Gwendolen, yes, I am quite aware of the fact, and I often wish that in public, at any rate, you had been more demonstrative. For me, you have always had an irresistible fascination. Even before I met you, I was far from indifferent to you. Jack looks at her in amazement. We live, as I hope you know, Mr. Worthing, in an age of ideals. The fact is constantly mentioned in the more expensive monthly magazines and has reached the provincial pulpits, I am told, and my ideal has always been to love some and my ideal has always been to love someone of the name of Earnest. There was something in that name that inspires absolute confidence. The moment Algernon first mentioned to me that he had a friend called Ernest, I knew I was destined to love you. So Jack, you really love me, Gwendolen? Gwendolen, passionately. Jack, darling, you don't know how happy you've made me. Gwendolen, my own Ernest. Jack, but you don't really mean to say that you couldn't love me if my name wasn't Ernest. Gwendolen, but your name is Ernest. Jack, yes, I know it is, but supposing it wasn't, or supposing it was something else, do you mean to say you couldn't love me then? So Gwendolen, glibly, ah, that is clearly a metaphysical speculation, and like most metaphysical speculations, have very little reference at all to the actual facts of real life as we know them. What she's pretty much saying is like, well, that's your name anyway, so it just works out. So why even ask? So Jack, personally, darling, to speak quite candidly, I don't much care about the name of Ernest. I don't think the name suits me at all. So Gwendolen, it suits you perfectly. It is a divine name. It has a music of its own. It produces vibrations. That's funny. We'll end it right there, guys. We'll end it right there. This is pretty kind of satirical, kind of funny. It's funny.